All right, guys, thanks for waiting while the computer system imploded. Now let's go ahead and get started with introductions. I'm Tim Jacobs, I represent the Community Emergency Response Team.
I'm Adrian Beck with the Missoula Office of Emergency Management.
Ken Parks, Missoula Office of Emergency Management.
Nick Holloway, Missoula Emergency Management.
Marty Whitmore with the Weather Service.
Stephanie Novak, Missoula CERT.
Trent Drinkwalter, University of Montana, Environmental Health and Safety.
Ben Mason, University of Montana, Environmental Health and Safety.
Caitlin Nielsen, St. Pat's Emergency Preparedness Coordinator.
Shane Coleman, Northwestern Energy Wildfire Mitigation Manager.
And Charles Tuss, Northwestern Wildfire.
Max Repholz, Missoula County Emergency Management.
Julia Gore, Missoula Public Health.
Bill Manson, Team Rubicon.
Chris Clark, the Facilities and Security Director at Community Medical Center.
Brian Hensel, City of Missoula Deputy Public Works Director, Streets.
Ken Morris, Missoula Rural Fire. Kirk Paulson, Missoula Rural Fire.
Riley Kane, Missoula County Climate Action Program.
Rob Edwards, Disaster Program Manager, American Red Cross.
Angela Yance, City Public Works.
Matthew Mill,
The CHS Refined Fuels Pipeline Terminal Manager.
Eric Wedgold, United Way.
Dave Stromeyer, Missoula County Commissioner.
Rebecca Wallace, Missoula Search and Rescue.
Randy Elcon, Missoula Emergency Management. Ben Slater, Missoula Police.
Bob Campbell, City Council.
Travis Ross, Missoula Public Health, Environmental Health Division.
All right, thank you for being here. Next thing on the agenda, you can ignore the election of officers, was last month and it didn't get taken off. No, I'm good there. And now we will go to the next item, which is public comment for anything not on the current agenda. Anyone? All right. Approval of the minutes from last meeting. Nick did send those out. So we'll entertain a motion to approve.
Mr. Chair, this is Adrian. I'd make a motion to approve the minutes as presented.
We have a motion. Do I have a second? Those are approved as written and handed out. Oh, sorry. Got ahead of myself. All in favor? Any opposed? Okay, so they're approved as written. Next we have a community preparedness presentation about the Lahaina Fire IMT deployment.
Okay, if you can pull that up, please, Adrian. Thank you. There we go. So, in January, our team, the Western Montana All Hazards Incident Management Team, deployed to Lahaina as a result of an EMAC request. That's Emergency Management Assistance Compact. An EMAC is really a state-to-state mutual aid system that allowed us to do that. We weren't the first from Montana to go to Maui and work on the Lahaina fire. We were preceded by Brad Davis from the Missoula Fire Department in November, and 3 members of the Missoula Fire Department in December, and then us in January. And some folks came after us as well, and we'll talk about those folks a little later. Next slide, please. So the incident occurred on August 8th when there was hot, dry conditions and windy conditions as a result of a nearby hurricane that allowed a spark of a fire to develop into a much larger fire, which often happens with fires. with those kind of conditions. But there was also 4 fires that day, not just Lahaina. Lahaina was the one that was most heavily impacted by far, and over 100 folks perished that day. And so that makes it the deadliest wildfire in the last 100 years. Over 2,200 structures destroyed, displacing thousands of people. And in turn, those people displaced tourists following that. So there's a big economic hit to Maui and Hawaii that continues on to this day and will continue for a while. So they really need to solve the housing issue to get back their economy back running. Right now, a lot of their businesses are sort of on life support. So that's the situation they're in. You can see on the map there where the fires were. The westernmost fire is Lahaina, and then the one that, just above Kihei, and the other 2 are in what's called upcountry. So they took some resources away from the Lahaina fire at the time, and it proved to be a big problem. Next. The team, I just mentioned that we had 4 people from the Missoula Office of Emergency Management there. That should be Missoula. 2 in operations, 1 in logistics, and 1 in finance, and that was myself, Ken Parks, Randy Ocon, and Max Rebholtz, all in the room here. We tied in with a planning section chief that came in from Michigan, and an incident commander that came in from the Big Island of Hawaii. And we tied in with the local emergency management staff. And so, as many of you know, one of the great things about incident command is that it's standardized. So it's not too hard to tie in with all these folks because they already know what their role is. They don't necessarily know what the incident is about, but they know where their fit is into the emergency management team. There was also an emergency manager within the EOC where we were working, and that emergency manager was brand new. Our first day of work was January 3rd. We traveled on January 2nd, and their new emergency manager's first day of work was January 2nd. So he'd been there 1 day, and he has an emergency background. He was a battalion chief in Maui Fire, but he has no emergency management background. And while there's some overlap, they're vastly different in responsibilities and roles. There were also 2 other local Maui EOC emergency management staffers there, out of a total of how many that started? 9 that started. So they cycled through quite a few people after this fire occurred. It was just extremely impactful to that department, which is very unfortunate. So. Next slide. Ken, you want to talk a little bit about?
Sure. So when we got ordered up, the mission described to us was we were there to support the Maui County Emergency Management Office. Was one branch of what we were doing. Like Mick mentioned, they had 9 and they were down to 2, so they had a lot of gaps in their organization, and so they were using the EMAC process to bring people over who had experience in emergency management, but also had experience in the incident command system and dealing with wildfires. So they were looking for people with those kind of special skill sets. And we kind of fit the bill, so we headed over there to help them reestablish their EOC, be there in case they had another incident. We were there to staff in case they had, another flooding, or while we were there, they had 2 rain events. That may be another slide. I'm getting ahead of myself, but. And we were to help them. They were very interested in how we had developed our incident management team here in Missoula, and how we were able to deploy to disasters. They wanted to mimic kind of some of the things that we had done. So we were also there to help them with the Lahaina fire itself. There was still a lot to do there. When we arrived, the Army Corps of Engineers were in the process of removing dirt, debris removal they called it, but the EPA had identified the first 4 inches of soil that was left behind after the fire to be hazardous to human health. So the Army Corps was going in, scraping the soil off, then they would retest it, and then once it was all scraped off and ready to go, then the people would be able to rebuild. But it was a long process, complicated. A lot of coordination was required between the agencies, and we assisted them with that. In addition to the fact that they had the whole area blocked off with security personnel, so we were helping manage who could get in and out of the scene and help with the security management. Next slide. Oh, yeah, and the housing issue, they had set up an office of recovery, and obviously all these displaced citizens had just moved out into the population, and FEMA was providing them hotel rooms or condos and places to live, but it was quite a bit of a shell game of moving the people around the island, trying to find places for them to stay with, and they had a lot of impact on the tourist industry, because they pulled up a lot of those places where tourists would normally stay were then being filled with the displaced residents. And so that was a big issue, was talked about a lot, but it kind of was kind of above what we were doing.
The debris removal was compounded by the fact that there was nowhere good to put it. So we were talking about roughly 40,000 dump truck loads worth of debris that would have been transported when it was all said and done. That was what was estimated. And nobody wanted it in their backyard. And Maui's kind of a small island. So what are you going to do with all that? We came up with a temporary debris site, and people weren't very happy with that location. And I think after we left, they found a permanent debris site for it somewhere on the island. And I'm sure a lot of people weren't thrilled with that location either, but it has to go somewhere. So also while we were there, our second charge was to manage emerging incidents that necessitated opening the EOC, activating the EOC beyond just the wildfire response. And the wildfire response was really recovery at that point. So we did have a couple occasions where we needed to activate the EOC and staff it overnight. Randy and Max staffed it overnight, and they were both weather events that resulted in flash flooding, people having to be rescued off of a bridge and out of cars that were starting to get increasingly submerged. We also had a possible tornado touchdown on Molokai E, which is extremely unusual. We didn't get to ground truth that, but the weather service over there had thought that that might have occurred. High surf was occurring all the time. That did not necessitate opening the EOC, but that was a regular occurrence over there. So developing a strategy for a Maui incident management team. Started with recruitment. Here, I'll let you take this one, Ken.
So, Amos, the new emergency manager over there, he really had a dream of putting together an incident management team, and part of what we did was sort of manage his expectations. He thought it was something that he could do rather quickly. And as we all know, who have been a part of the incident management team here, it takes years to really put together a solid operating incident management team. It doesn't happen overnight or even in a few weeks. And so we had 3 weeks to be there, and we did what we could, but he had so many other things going on that it really pulled from our effort to try and get him moving in that direction. So we did what we could. We attempted to put on an ICS 300 class, and there just wasn't time. Everybody was pretty much burned out, right? They had been doing this thing for 6 months already. And when you asked them to do one more thing on top of that, it was a big ask. And we realized that pretty quickly, that the folks there were tired. Their attention, they were already on their very thin attention spans and needing vacation. So asking them to do something above and beyond their normal duties and join an incident management team and take some classes and really be fired up about this was probably not the appropriate time. So we had a lot of discussions about the timing of building this team and the efforts that it's going to take, and that was followed up by the second group of Montanans that came in behind us.
Next slide.
Set clear expectations from the start. That comes out of a little bit of what Ken said. We knew that it would take years to develop an incident management team similar to ours because we've done it before. Initially, they thought we could have a team assembled within the 3 weeks we were there. And that wasn't possible, especially with the burned out folks that we were talking with. So helping them understand what was realistic and what wasn't realistic was important. We did set up a timeline and a training schedule for them so that they could follow that and try and get there. Build and maintain trust through relationships. So whenever we go out as an incident management team, we start building relationships as soon as we get somewhere, and that really helps us be successful in the end. We've noticed if you are in a situation where you don't have the relationships built when an emergency or a disaster occurs locally, those relationships aren't going to magically happen at the time of a disaster. And that's what kind of happened over there. They were kind of siloed a little bit from before the disaster and siloed quite a bit after the disaster. And that was something we knew, but when we saw it firsthand, it just kind of validated what we already knew. LEPC, they don't even have LEPC meetings. So that's a great place to develop those relationships. Everybody in here is from a different organization, different entity. We all know each other in Missoula, so we should be really thrilled about that because that really helps out when the time comes, the need comes. Fiscal oversight and understanding emergency accounting is hugely important. Understanding what how FEMA categorizes debris removal and protective measures is important. Knowing when to put an accounting code in for a disaster so that all disaster-related expenses have that code and can be pulled up later is really important. And doing it in a FEMA-friendly manner really takes the headache out of it big time down the road. And they didn't have a great system for that. When we got there 5 months into the incident, we were having to approve expenditures that occurred the week of the incident with no real idea of what may or may not have happened. So having those financial accountability pieces in place beforehand really makes a big difference afterwards. Building codes. Ken, you want to talk a little bit about building codes?
So some history with Lahaina. The sugar factories had moved in there. I think it was in the early 1900s. And the workers who came in with those factories just started building in and around that factory and built a neighborhood which turned into Lahaina. And so it really started off from footpaths and kind of your shacks and grew from there into a neighborhood that was very tightly compressed with very narrow roads and very few building standards that were enforced throughout the whole thing. So to describe it as a tinderbox, I think would be an understatement. And what it turned into an obvious then death trap after that. When the wind hit and the trees fell and people were trapped in there and they couldn't get out, it really could be traced back to how that neighborhood was constructed and how it was built and wasn't managed to begin with. And so some of that, when you look at like that Swiss cheese model of how a disaster happens and the very beginning of how Lahaina was built is really set up those people for this disaster, that happened later, 100 years later. They couldn't anticipate that then, but what we know now is that building codes and smart construction do work, and they do prevent deaths and mayhem when incidents do occur. So that was just so painfully obvious when we were there and looked at historical photos of what it used to look like and then what happened in there and the stories from the survivors of what that fire did as it came through, moving from house to house with no fire breaks and no ability to really get out of there safely. So it just really stressed and really showed that building codes do work and smart development has a purpose and it's life safety, if things really go bad.
So they couldn't have anticipated when this disaster was going to happen, but it could be anticipated that this disaster would happen in some shape or form because of that. Diversity of experience and background is an IMT's strength. Our incident management team comes from all different backgrounds and agencies, emergency response agencies, and it really helps us function. And that standardization within incident command really helps us function together. And so we have a planning cycle that is hugely important that we get going every time we go out. And that is really the engine that drives response for us, whether it's in Lahaina on a wildfire, flooding, COVID, or a hurricane. The thing that makes it all work is the planning cycle. And that's a daily meeting plan. We start off with the operational brief, what we're going to do today. We have tactics meetings during the day at a certain time. We have a command and general staff meeting every day where we talk about what's going right, what's going wrong, and then we have a planning meeting at the end of the day to talk about what we're doing tomorrow. Situational awareness, this is something we picked up over in Lahaina, in Maui. The EOC is actually in a place called Wakalua, which is about 45 minutes from Lahaina. And when people walked in, when we had those two weather-related incidents where we staffed the EOC overnight, people were walking in the morning and wanting to see, basically from left to right, what the situation was. So there might be TVs and whiteboards all set up, but they wanted a consistent look so that the mayor could walk in and just say, okay, I get it, I know what's going on. So we've always done that, but not to the degree they like to see it. So I think that's something we're going to try and incorporate here a little more. And then recovery. We were 5 months into this incident. Recovery was going. It was just sort of getting started in some respects, especially debris removal when we were there. But it's obviously a long-term thing. It's not a sprint. And you're going to have people that get tired out, worn out. You have to take care of staff. That's a big lesson when you're going through a long-term, long-duration event like this. So kind of goes back a little bit to the IMT development stuff that we were talking about. It's hard to ask staff to take on something new when they've just been through and are continuing to go through this huge, long-duration, stressful incident that they've been through. Next slide. So, you want to talk about the incoming team a little bit?
So, Maui EOC and with the HIEMA, the state organization, the state emergency, they sort of identified the kind of people they were looking for, and we helped them search Montana for the right type of emergency managers, and we were able to get emergency managers from Gallatin County, Yellowstone County, and Broadwater. Yeah, so anyway, 3 very good emergency managers from kind of different perspectives came in, and they were there to help them continue our mission that we had started of building their EOC up. So we had a transition. They came in 2 days before we left, and we were able to pass the baton off to them, and they were able to successfully keep moving forward. But it's important to have that transition, that face-to-face. It really helped us. We didn't get one when we showed up. They had been Christmas break, and so we came in cold, tried to pick up what the other teams had been doing without any of that face-to-face or actual time with those folks to talk about what their mission was and how it correlates to what we were doing. So we had a little bit of a lag, before we picked up. Well, I think we were able to successfully transition with this new team and get them going in the right direction. So that was a good thing. That's all we got. You guys have any questions? I guess I would just like to add that every time we go out and go to these major disasters and get a chance to look at and deal with FEMA, the Army Corps, other structures or other organizations, we always learn something and bring it back to Missoula County. So I feel like what we learned there was, the big thing that sticks out to me is how do you deal with 3,000 displaced citizens who need housing? And in the midst of Missoula County and all of Montana going through a housing crunch, what would we do here? And it gives us kind of that what if, what if that happened here? How would we try to metabolize that? And how would we deal with a situation like that? And we, of course, don't have any answers at this point, but it's something for us to think about as we peer into the future.
All right, I guess the big thing I would take away from there is also that relationships are one of the biggest things that we can have here, and that relationships can really help smooth things out. So the bit of networking we do in this room every quarter is really important. If we ever need to sort of rely on each other when a disaster occurs. So thank you all for being here.
Okay. Thank you, Ken and Matt. Next thing is the pre-disaster mitigation plan update with Adrian.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So as I reported back at our last quarterly meeting, we were just in the final stages of kind of getting agency comment, public comment. We have incorporated those. We sent the plan to the state of Montana for their initial review. They didn't have anything substantial, and then punted it up to FEMA Region 8, which is a requirement for both state and federal approval of the plan. And we did get some feedback from FEMA back that indicated we needed to incorporate and make some changes to the way our plan was presented. We did make those changes, and simultaneously to ensure that, and just by way of a little bit of a recap, won't belabor this too much, but the reason that we have to go through this process of updating our pre-disaster mitigation plan every 5 years is so that we maintain eligibility for federal FEMA grant programs that allow us to do mitigation projects, but also allow us to get FEMA federal funding in a disaster through their public assistance program. So having this plan compliant and updated every 5 years is really important to our communities by allowing us to access some of those federal programs. So in order to kind of stay in sync with that timeline, we had the county commission adopt the plan as approved by FEMA while we're continuing to wait for that final stamp of approval for FEMA. What that allowed us to do was we had two Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities grant applications that were going to be coming from the city. One to address a sewer line issue under the Clark Fork River, and the other to install a green roof project on the Missoula County Public Library for the stormwater. And those were really important projects. We didn't want to see those applications be jeopardized by having that plan not approved locally. And so we went ahead and did that initial step of having the commission approve it as approved by FEMA and the state. Where we stand now is we'll wait for that final approval from FEMA, and then the last kind of approval process, it will go to city council so that it is approved both by the city as well as the county. I don't have a good timeline as to when that will be. FEMA has been moving quicker than they have in past years as for that final approval process, but we're continuing to hope that certainly by June we would be in that position.
Well, thank you, Adrian. Next up is everyone's favorite part, the weather service update.
So looking back at the winter so far, we're actually doing pretty good precipitation-wise since the first of the year, kind of keeping up with climatological averages. But the end of last year was so dry that we had quite a deficit, so we're still running a bit below normal. You know, at the end of 23, the snowpacks were 60, 70%. Some of the basins caught up somewhat. Were as high as 80, 85% in some. I think over the last month or so, a few basins though have dropped back down, particularly like the Blackfoot. That's been one of our driest basins out there. So that's a thing we're tracking right now, of course, because we're kind of focused now on getting into the runoff season and what the potential is there. And of course here, the Clark Fork in Missoula has our most flood prevalent stream in all of western Montana recently. On average, this river floods about just under 50% of the time. So now with a 7.5 foot flood stage, so every other year if you want to do it that way. This year though, with the lack of snowpack right now, the potential is quite a bit lower than that. The problem is whatever snow does come out is peaking the flows in May and June timeframe. Those happen to be also our wettest months climatologically when we can get some of the big rain events. So we'll be watching for that. But it does not look like we're going to have a spring with that long duration type flooding that we can have with big snowpack. But the faster reaction flooding with a good closed off wet system in June is not out of the question. And we still don't have the capability to really forecast those type of events out very far. If you look at the forecast scenario, though, our Climate Prediction Center was going for a drier than normal spring, and that didn't make a lot of sense to us locally. We tried to look at analog El Nino years, years that looked very similar to this El Nino pattern as it decays, and there were several of those years were wetter than normal. So we didn't have a lot of confidence in that forecast. Well, when they updated we don't often go against what CPC is saying. They're the long-range climatologist experts. We're the short-range meteorologists, but we've got some people in our office that look at those stats. But anyway, once they updated the forecast, sure enough, they did away from the drier than normal spring, and they're not going wet, but they're going neutral. Before they have even less confidence on that wetter than normal. And April is kind of showing up that way. We're getting a lot of these showery regimes. And some of them are pretty potent, but they're not very widespread. So anyway, we'll keep watching that. This time of year, we're kind of transitioning between our biggest probably audience in the winter are the roads folks. Brian and the different folks out there, Montana. So we're still talking to those folks. In fact, this time of year, especially like at the state level, they've lost a lot of their seasonal drivers. So you have to even be more aggressive getting out ahead of storms with messaging because they're not necessarily geared up for it. But we're transitioning from that into spring burning and trying to find dry windows for those folks to get out and do their business there. So that's taken up a lot of our focus in the office. Agriculture, calving season, we try to help those folks out. Because of the susceptibility of calves in the first 24 hours if they can't dry off. If it's cold and wet, high humidity, things like that. So the calving season's starting to wane, or it's past its peak anyway. But now we're focused on plants, trees, orchids starting to bud out and things like that, and their susceptibility to late season frost. It wouldn't be a late season now. Right now our normal low is about freezing, so it's not really abnormal to freeze up. But so that's kind of our focus going forward. And the other streams in the area that are even lower with probabilities of flooding right now, the Bitter, as it enters Missoula. Blackfoot in particular is low because of that basin being so dry over the winter again. So we'll watch that and continue to talk to the responders and managers on that. Wildfire season. So that's probably ridiculous to even try to forecast that. Everybody thinks, they're born and raised with low snowpack means big fire season. It's just historically not the case. The timing of precip is hugely important to fire season. So the closer you get to the actual fire season, more important that precipitation matters. So what happened in November, December doesn't matter near as much as what's going to happen in June and even July and August. So we've seen many quiet fire seasons that looked pretty grim. We've also seen 4 or 5 inches of rain happen and flood out the sapphires in June, like in 2017, and then have a nasty fire season after that, when I think the term flash drought came about or was coined by somebody. So it's still too early to say. Weather Service, we don't really do the prediction of the fire season. I will say the weather is still forecast to be hotter and drier than normal. So if we start droughty and we go into hotter and drier than normal, that doesn't bode well for fire season, but it's too early to predict. Right now, the predictive services for the Northern Rockies Geographical Area Coordination Center, they only go out through July, and so they're just going normal for us. I think they are going above normal for just south of us in the northern part of the Great Basin, but each month they'll stick out another month, so they won't really get into our core season here for the next iteration on May 1st. So I think that's about all I need to say.
All right, thank you. Next up is emergency alerts issued this quarter. Adrian.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In this quarter, it looks like we had 4 emergency alerts that were issued in different parts of the city and the county. Almost all of them were law enforcement related. So we had 1 shelter in place for law enforcement activity occurring in a neighborhood, 1 which was sent out at the request of the police department to be on the lookout for a suspect known to be in the area, and 1 and 2 for a missing person.
All right. Next up is the standing committee reports, IMT Oversight Committee.
So the committee has not met, but it will be meeting to set the spring roster, not spring roster, excuse me, to set the roster for 2024. Applications are currently open for team members to join the Western Montana All Hazard Incident Management Team, and that we will have a spring exercise with new members as well as existing members on May 21st to go through and kind of dust the rust off.
All right, the Access and Functional Needs Committee.
Hello.
I'm Julia. I'm the Public Health Emergency Preparedness Coordinator at the Health Department. For Access and Functional Needs, I reported last time that we had set some project goals, and they're going very well. I think a big highlight is that Summit Independent Living is going to start a preparedness class. It's going to be 4 sessions long for their clientele to come and learn about individual preparedness. I'm really excited about that. And then I can also speak to the next bullet point is the HEAT group is continuing to meet. I believe I've heard through the grapevine, I'm a little behind on my emails that we had a measles case here in Missoula, and so that you're shaking your head yes. So is that confirmation from St. Pat? Okay. I haven't dug into that case yet. Can't confirm nor deny. So I think that will be definitely a bullet point on our next meeting. And I'm trying to get more emergency responders involved in that meeting. So if you're interested, come up to me and we can chat.
All right, thank you. I believe next up is grants with Adrian.
Grants. Okay, so we've got a whole bunch going on with grants. This is grant season for those of you that also apply to federal grants. This is kind of the time ahead of the new federal fiscal year. But by way of just update, last year we were successful in securing a Homeland Security grant for a mobile command vehicle. We've been kind of fraught with delays and all those kinds of things, but here in the last month we did take delivery of that vehicle. Here in Missoula, it's still not fully ready for deployment or utilization as intended, but over the next several months, we will be working with all of our cooperating agencies as well as some local vendors to finish the upfit of that. And the hope is that, you know, maybe by winter, we'll be able to roll that out. But then moving into just kind of staying on that Homeland Security grant, the applications for this year's Homeland Security grant were due about a month ago. The executive committee, the chair, vice chair, and I corresponded around the 2 applications that were submitted out of our jurisdiction. One was for the Missoula Sheriff's Office, who was applying for about $500,000 for a very specialized vehicle for their SRT and SWAT deployments. It's called a ROOK, R-O-O-K. Essentially, it's kind of like a skid steer, an armored skid steer that will allow for kind of the protection of law enforcement to get very close to buildings and help in those situations. Additionally, we put in an application for Missoula County for some building security upgrades to do some automatic lock buttons, similar to panic buttons that would allow for kind of quickly locking down our facilities should the need arise. The Senior Advisory Committee at the state level met last week to rank all of the applications from across the state for the competitive program. And it appears at this point in time that both of the Missoula applications will be put forward for funding consideration. We also have an open Homeland Security grant, which we're calling our CPR grant. For a bit of a refresher on this, this is kind of our community preparedness grant where we have funding available that we're utilizing to train as many community members in hands-on CPR as humanly possible. We've kind of started that program in earnest, but really it will kick off in full swing come this summer when we have the opportunity to do a lot of these pop-up courses and course delivery in an opportunistic way. But the other component of that is Pulse Point, which is an app-based software that notifies CPR-trained individuals of CPR 911 calls in public places if they happen to be in a proximity of that call, and as well as mapping all of our automated external defibrillators in our jurisdiction. We're still in the testing phase of that particular piece of software, and we'll be doing some public rollout of that probably in the next month, as well as some press releases and things like that around that. Item C, the CDC grant. I don't know if I mentioned this at the last meeting, but University of Montana applied to the Natural Hazard Center, which is a CDC-funded program that the only eligible recipient is a university. So we partnered with the University of Montana. They were successful in that application. And the project that they're working on specifically is looking at the last 5 years of 911 call data across all call types. And then, excuse me, and then putting in some adverse conditions by way of climate data. So when we have extreme heat events, extreme cold events, poor air quality, and seeing what the relationship is with those different 911 call types, but also the idea is to create somewhat of a heat map, no pun intended, of where these calls have a higher preponderance in those adverse conditions, with the hope that we can begin to understand that relationship a little bit better and potentially deploy better mitigation strategies when we know that those events are going to occur. What else? Okay. Item D, the CPC grant. This is a DNRC grant program that was made available through funding allocation from the state legislature last year. This is their second year. Missoula County has applied essentially to enhance our capabilities with our role as fire warden. So this would allow us to put essentially a duty officer on during critical fire weather conditions to help that local government coordination amongst all of our local government agencies in a wildfire, but also be that liaison between state and federal resources. Additionally, this will allow us to have a better capacity and capability for managing the incident qualification system across multiple disciplines within Missoula County, so we can look at incident qualifications across all of our local government entities. And then being able to help those local fire districts identify their training needs and facilitate that as well. And finally, we have the Hazardous Materials Education and Preparedness grant that we applied for on behalf of St. Patrick's Hospital. And I think Caitlin will probably give an update of that during the roundtable discussion, but that is underway with the kind of the intended purpose to assist St. Pat's in developing their health emergency response team around addressing decontaminating patients who may have been contaminated from an external source as they're entering into the hospital. And I'll call that end of the grant report.
Okay, and we'll just slide right into upcoming trainings with Adrian.
Okay, so we got a couple things going. We have the Geohazards Workshop May 1st and 2nd. That will be at the Election Center for those of you that were at the last LEPC meeting. It's there at the corner of Russell and Wyoming. This is an opportunity for us to meet with geohazard experts and geotechnical folks from Montana Tech University. Specifically, we're interested in looking at kind of new revelations around the Bitterroot Fault and what those implications could be to our infrastructure in Missoula. So anyone and everyone is welcome. Do we have a link? Okay, we'll send something out to the group as far as if you're interested in that, want to register ahead of time. But it should be a really informative workshop. Second, S203, which is the Public Information Officer. That's in Missoula, May 6th through the 10th. If you're interested in that, please contact Nick. And then finally, it's that time of year where we will be assembling kind of a multi-agency committee to look at our multi-year training and exercise plans and goals across multiple jurisdictions. So if you're interested in participating in that, typically we'll meet for a couple hours and talk about trainings that are in queue, as well as some kind of higher ticket items that maybe we want to bring to our jurisdiction relative to kind of emergency response and emergency management over the next 3 years.
Okay, and last but not least, local and statewide hazmat incidents since the last meeting.
we're getting the sign from the regional hazmat team reps that no significant hazardous materials incidents since the last meeting.
All right, round table or other business? Anyone have anything?
I have a couple things that I've mentioned before we hand the mic off to a couple folks in the room. Next week is Dispatcher Appreciation Week, or Public Safety Telecommunicators Appreciation Week, which is a really long way of saying that, but it's a way to honor and appreciate the critical work that our 911 dispatchers do 365 days a year, 24 hours a day. And it's the week that is set aside to kind of acknowledge that critically important role. And so here in Missoula, we'll be doing some things, but I encourage everyone to reach out and tell them thanks. The last thing I'll mention is that, as Marty indicated, it's getting to be flood season, close. So probably here in the next 3 weeks, towards the end of April, subject to change by forecast, but we'll gather our usual stakeholders to look at our emergency operations plan. To Nick's point, kind of the relationships that we have ahead of the emergency are so critically important. This is an opportunity for us to just make sure people who've changed positions, understanding roles and expectations, if we should experience flooding this spring. More to come on that.
Robin?
Hello. So like I said earlier, I'm Caitlin Nielsen. I'm from St. Pat's. I'm the Emergency Preparedness Coordinator. So I do just want to touch a little bit on that HMEP grant that Adrian kind of talked about. So pretty much our plan for kind of this work with this grant that we're doing is we're getting a whole bunch of supplies to help with an exercise and some training that we're doing with our HURT team. So HURT is our hospital emergency response team, and pretty much the purpose of it is to protect the hospital by decontaminating patients from a mass casualty incident involving some sort of contaminant, whatever that may be. So with this upcoming, with our current grant and then our upcoming exercise, we're going to do something in August, and our plan is to test our emergency treatment area. And we're going to set it up out on Owen Street behind the hospital, and we're going to have an exercise with volunteers where our team can put their decom skills to work, then make sure that we're functional, and just kind of assess where our team needs to go from there. So that's very exciting. We're very excited to kind of do it. We're going to be working with a lot of different people, doing three-way calls, as well as working on getting other agencies involved. So if you're interested in that, please let me know. Also, if you're interested in being a volunteer, you get a free I'm Naked t-shirt, which everyone loves. But it is a really great opportunity where for patients of all different shapes, sizes, geriatric, pediatric, regular people of any type. So,
Anyone else have anything?
So again, Travis Ross with Missoula Public Health. Just a quick update on the household hazardous waste collection center. I'm sure you all have heard about that in previous meetings, but getting close to the finish line there. So the structure will, this is a joint venture with Home Resource out on Wyoming Street. And so we're establishing a year-round collection point at that location. The facility is designed for hazardous materials. It's secondarily contained and has intrinsic protections and fire suppression system. Anyway, it is in place, and I hear the pavement will be poured this week, and the electrical has been connected. So getting there. We hope to be operational in the summer, early fall. Also looking at potentially a collection event because it's been several years and we know there's a lot of stuff out there. So anyway, just a quick update there.
I have a question over here.
Yes.
Do you, can you provide kind of days of the week that you're anticipating it will be open? Or do you know that yet?
Yes and no. We're anticipating 3 days a week, and it's going to be by appointment. So people will register online, and then there will be some limitations in terms of the quantities that are accepted. It's not for businesses; it's just residents. that said, I'm sure we're going to learn some things early on, but yeah, we don't, in the current model, we don't have dedicated staff to this, so we're pulling existing staffing resources to take care of it. So yeah, 3 days a week, starting off.
Anyone else? All right. Thank everybody for being here, and we do apologize for the computer issues at the beginning. The next LEPC meeting is July 9th. So with that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
We have an initial. Do we have a second? Seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? All right. See you on July.